The tale of the Night Haunter, Primarch of the 8th Legion, is one of the darkest and most tragic within the annals of the Imperium. Unlike his brothers, whose heroics or betrayals often reflected a clearer sense of purpose, the Night Haunter's story is defined by paradoxes and contradictions. He was both a ruthless tyrant and a reluctant enforcer, a visionary and a madman, a judge of evil, yet himself consumed by it. His fall into madness was not the result of a single event, but rather the culmination of forces, both external and internal, that shaped him from the moment of his creation. Born as one of the Emperor's genetically engineered demigods, the Night Haunter was designed to embody judgment and retribution. However, the grim reality of his homeworld, Nostramo, and the intrinsic flaws of his nature brought out the worst aspects of this design. His early life was marked by relentless violence, shaped by the desperation to impose order upon a lawless and corrupt society. Yet even as he delivered brutal justice, a seed of torment grew within him, fed by his actions and the warped environment that demanded them. Compounding this inner conflict was the unnatural clarity of his foresight, a gift or curse that allowed him to see the future with devastating precision. He bore witness to the Imperium's inevitable decline and his own tragic destiny, knowledge that would drive even the strongest minds to despair. Whether this power was part of the Emperor's design or a result of the Chaos God's interference during his infancy in the Warp, it placed an unbearable burden on his already fractured psyche. From the moment of his conception, the Night Haunter seemed crafted for a singular and ominous role within the Emperor's grand design, to serve as the enforcer of the Imperium. Among the Primarchs, each engineered to embody specific aspects of leadership, war, or creation, he was unique in his alignment with fear as a tool for compliance. His nature was intrinsically suited to enforcing the Emperor's law through terror, a purpose that set him apart from his siblings, who embodied hope, wisdom, or strength. The Night Haunter's deep understanding of morality, paired with his unyielding commitment to its enforcement, meant he saw justice not as an ideal, but as an absolute that must be upheld at any cost. It was this predisposition that made Nostramo both a fitting and damning home for him. The planet, a festering cesspool of corruption and moral decay, was a mirror to his own nature. Its rampant lawlessness demanded the very kind of absolute and unrelenting justice he was born to dispense. When the Night Haunter descended upon his new world, he set about reshaping it in his image, purging the criminal elite and instilling terror so profound that the mere mention of his name became synonymous with order. While he succeeded in restoring order to Nostramo, the methods he employed, torture, execution, and the public display of his enemies, came to define him as much as the results they achieved. Yet there was a paradox at the heart of the Night Haunter's purpose. In eradicating lawlessness through fear, he became the very monster he sought to destroy, creating a cycle where his moral clarity warred against the acts required to enforce it. This internal conflict, seeded early by his purpose as the Emperor's enforcer, would grow into a torment that defined his life and ultimately hastened his descent into madness. The world of Nostramo was as much a curse as it was a crucible for the Primarch of the 8th Legion. A planet cloaked in perpetual night, its dark skies mirrored the bleakness of its soul. Crime, exploitation, and moral decay defined its existence, with the strong preying on the weak in a society bereft of hope or justice. It was upon this desolate planet that the Night Haunter emerged, a figure whose very presence heralded both salvation and damnation. His arrival marked the end of Nostramo's ruling elites, whose unchecked avarice and cruelty had plunged the world into an abyss. Through methods as calculated as they were horrific, he eradicated the criminal underworld, dispensing justice with a ferocity that left no room for rebellion. Yet Nostramo was more than a challenge to overcome. It was a reflection of the Night Haunter himself. The planet's moral void exacerbated his intrinsic flaws, magnifying the darker aspects of his character. While the Primarch was relentless in his pursuit of justice, Nostramo's culture of cruelty and treachery permeated his worldview, reinforcing the belief that fear was the only path to control. His sadism, perhaps an unintended byproduct of his design, found fertile ground on Nostramo, where acts of violence were not just tools of enforcement, but also personal catharsis. In the years following his ascension to power, the scars left by Nostramo became increasingly evident. While he had purged the planet of its overt corruption, the seeds of its influence lingered within him. The world's legacy manifested not only in his violent methods, but also in the recruits he drew into his legion. The Night Lords, over time, became a mirror of Nostramo's worst aspects, populated by criminals, murderers, and the irredeemable. The Night Haunter's inability to purge these influences from both his legion and himself became a source of loathing, directed inward as much as outward, and played no small part in the unraveling of his mind. Beneath the terror and violence that defined the Primarch of the Eighth, there was a profound and tragic internal struggle. The Night Haunter did not revel in cruelty without consequence. He was deeply aware of the monstrosity of his own actions and the moral contradictions they represented. Though his methods were brutal, his ultimate aim was justice, a world free from corruption and crime, even if achieved through fear. This awareness set him apart from many of his brothers, for he despised the necessity of his actions even as he carried them out. This internal war was not simply one of ideals, but also a conflict against his darker instincts. The Night Haunter was plagued by an undeniable sadism that seemed woven into his very being, a trait that not only horrified him, but also undermined his own vision of justice. Unlike some of his siblings, who fully embraced their natures, the Primarch of the Night Lords actively sought to suppress his basest desires. His hatred for the criminals and degenerates who populated his legion was a reflection of his hatred for the same tendencies within himself. He longed to be an instrument of righteous punishment, a sword of justice, yet he could never fully escape the shadow of his own corruption. This struggle took its toll on his psyche, as each violent act further alienated him from the ideals he aspired to. Over time, the weight of this dissonance began to crush him, leading to bouts of self-loathing and paranoia. His foresight only compounded this torment, as he saw not only the flaws within himself, but also the bleak fate awaiting the Imperium. His efforts to overcome his darker nature and impose his vision of order ultimately became the catalyst for his descent into madness. In seeking to master the monster within, the Night Haunter became consumed by it, a tragic reflection of the very evil he sought to eradicate. The Night Haunter's gift of foresight was both his greatest strength and his most harrowing torment. Unlike many of his brothers, whose visions were limited to fleeting glimpses or battle-focused insights, his prescience stretched far into the future, encompassing both personal and galactic events. From the moment of his emergence, this ability defined him, shaping his every decision and action. Yet this gift was not a source of empowerment, but a chain that bound him to despair. Among the most devastating truths revealed to him was the inevitable downfall of the Imperium. the very empire his father sought to build. The Night Haunter foresaw a galaxy consumed by corruption, stagnation, and ceaseless war. This knowledge cast a shadow over every act of justice he sought to impose, tainting his victories with the certainty of their impermanence. His foresight allowed him to see not only the sins of the present, but also those yet to come, driving his belief that fear and brutal punishment were the only means to forestall humanity's decay. The emotional toll of this unrelenting vision was profound. The Night Haunter did not merely witness the Imperium's eventual ruin, he also saw his own death at the hands of the Emperor's agents, a betrayal he could neither avoid nor prevent. The Chaos Gods, perhaps sensing an opportunity, may have amplified his prescience during his formative years in the Warp, ensuring that his visions were as vivid as they were inescapable. The sight of his own fall, combined with his inability to alter the course of events, broke something fundamental within him. His foresight became a double-edged sword, enabling him to act decisively but eroding his sanity with every revelation. It painted a grim picture of a universe where justice was futile, and his role in the Emperor's grand design was ultimately a failure. This knowledge, layered upon the burden of his violent nature and the corruption of his legion, accelerated his descent into madness, transforming him from a fearsome enforcer of order into a figure consumed by fatalism and despair. The Night Haunter's relationship with his legion was one of initial pride and eventual loathing. The Night Lords, in their early days, reflected their Primarch's vision of ruthless enforcers who wielded fear as a weapon to maintain order. Yet, over time, they devolved into something far darker, embodying the very traits that their Primarch sought to eradicate. This degeneration, fueled by their recruitment from Nostramo's criminal underbelly and their unchecked acts of terror during the Great Crusade, became a festering wound that deepened the Night Haunter's despair and accelerated his descent into madness. Initially, the Night Haunter sought to mold his legion into an extension of his own ethos. They were to be executioners of justice, meting out punishment to those who defied the Emperor's law. Their tactics were grim but effective. Worlds brought to compliance by the Night Lords rarely dared to rebel. However, the recruits drawn from Nostramo increasingly brought with them the corruption and cruelty of their homeworld. These individuals reveled in the violence they were meant to wield as a tool, turning justice into sadism and punishment into spectacle. The Night Haunter recognized this degeneration and grew increasingly disgusted by his own sons. To him, the Legion's slide into barbarity was a personal failure, a reflection of his inability to rise above the flaws of his origin. He had aspired to create a force of order, yet what he saw in the Night Lords was a mirror of Nostramo's decadence. The more his warriors embraced their darker impulses, the more the Night Haunter's vision of justice was tainted, leaving him isolated and embittered. This deterioration was exacerbated by the Great Crusade itself. The Night Lords were often deployed to the most rebellious or lawless worlds, where their methods of fear and violence were given free rein. Over time, this unchecked brutality fostered a culture of nihilism within the Legion. Many Night Lords came to see themselves not as agents of order, but as instruments of chaos, delighting in the suffering they inflicted. The Night Haunter's attempts to curb this descent only served to deepen his resentment for his sons, as he saw them as not just beyond redemption, but as a source of his own torment. By the time of the Horus Heresy, the Night Haunter had all but abandoned hope for his legion. They had become a grotesque parody of the justice he once sought to impose. their crimes and atrocities a mockery of his original purpose. This betrayal, compounded by his own internal struggles, contributed to his alienation from his brothers and his eventual rebellion against the Imperium. The Night Lord's degeneration was not just the tragedy of a legion. It was the tragedy of a Primarch whose vision was corrupted by the very tools he sought to use to achieve it. In the end, the Night Haunter's madness may not have been entirely of his own making. The time he spent in the warp as an infant exposed him to the predations of the Chaos Gods, planting seeds of corruption long before he set foot on Nostramo. Perhaps they amplified his gift of foresight, allowing him to glimpse the Imperium's decay and his own doom, not to enlighten, but to torment. This cursed insight, combined with his relentless pursuit of justice, twisted him into an unwilling pawn of the very forces he despised. And yet, the warp alone did not forge his fate. The oppressive corruption of Nostramo, the nature of his design as the Emperor's enforcer, and the moral isolation of his role all conspired to shape his downfall. He was a Primarch caught between the lofty ideals of justice and the brutal realities of his own methods. His legacy, like his life, remains a cautionary tale of how ambition, environment, and unseen forces can unravel even the most potent minds. The tragedy of the Night Haunter lies in his struggle against himself, his circumstances, and the gods who may have marked him from the start. His story invites reflection on the nature of fate, free will, and the burden of power. If you've enjoyed this exploration of one of the Imperium's most complex figures, like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more deep dives into the grim darkness of the far future.